Welcome back to yet another installment. So we've got two finished pieces of pattern weld here. The first one that has the most work into it is, of course, our loaf here of Compass Rose Mosaic. And so I'm going to go over to the bandsaw and start chopping 30-degree tiles off of this. A little thicker than I normally do. Probably going to go in the neighborhood of ½ inch on these. Maybe even a heavy half. We'll see. Chop off enough tiles for our Mosaic Bolo. And then we got this edge bar material. I forged that to a heavy rectangle, so we're going to rip that in half on the bandsaw, on the vertical bandsaw with a sled, and I'll show you how that works for edge bar material and handle frame material. But first what we got to do is surface grind this on all sides, and you do that because forging scale is hard on bandsaw blades, and then you also do it so that these surfaces, which are going to be mating surfaces for the next welds on this after tiling, you do that so these are already clean and you don't have to grind them, so the angle you get off your saw is already a precise angle that works for you to flip and weld these without having to grind scale off after saw cutting. And then as for grinding these sides off, well, it's nice to clean it off anyway, but also you get better tacks at the edges of your tiles on your layout for the flipped out final billet. So anyway, we're going to go through all that, surface grinding first on both these bars, and then a bunch of band sawing. And I'm not going to show all of that because it's super boring stuff, but I'll show enough to give you an idea of how boring it is.
Okay, we're heading over to the surface grinder. We got the big billet on there, and we're just cleaning off 10 or 15 thou, as little as we can to get down to a clean surface. I'm always looking for, is this billet square, or do I need to shim it up a little bit under one side with some razor blades to kind of steer it into square, and maybe do I need to shim it up a little bit under one end? Is it a little tapered? You can do a lot with shims right there at the surface grinder to true up your bar even further. As long as you don't have too much to take off of any one dimension, then you're generally okay. You can see there, I always wipe the chuck down after I'm done grinding something before I put another thing on there, because you don't want any little particles of bits standing apart up off the chuck, making it inaccurate. Now with the other bar ground, we are taking the edge bar material. It hasn't been split yet. I'm just cleaning the sides off. That way it'll be easier for the bandsaw blade to do the work of splitting it after this step. Walk away every now and then, just let it grind and come back. And what do you know, I pretty much cleaned it all up while I was gone. What an obliging robotic helper. This machine was actually filmed grinding material for my Forged in Fire Win Season 2, Episode 2, but for some reason it didn't make the cut. Most of what they shoot in your shop doesn't end up making the cut. I think it showed like a minute and a half of me building that sword at most. Now we're starting to chop tiles off of our mosaic bar at a 30-degree angle. And I made sure to anneal this billet so that it would cut like butter with the saw, just to take it easy on my blade. That's just a whole lot of cutting solids, more than most people have to do in a fabrication job, at least sitting and babysitting the saw and trying to get a perfect cut every time. You can see I clean everything off with a rag. I make sure to keep all the swarf clear. Once I got my stop set, I clamp that stop down real tight so it doesn't get knocked out of alignment over time from the workpiece being constantly slid over to it. Always babysit it and try to be holding the saw and the stop switch when it breaks free. Toothbrush the swarf out. Make sure that there's not any little tag of metal or burr standing it off of the stop. Anything like that. Just little inaccuracies like that will find their way into your work, and they'll manifest as waste or failed welds, sketchiness. The more sketchiness you can cut out of your routines, and the more attention you can pay and focus to doing it right every time, the better your success will be, and the less time you'll ultimately waste. Now I was going to cut 8 tiles for this one. This billet is about 1.25 inches tall, so it'll end up being about 10-inch long billet there, which after being forge welded and drawn should easily stretch out to be enough stock to make the 12 to 13-inch cutting edge planned for the Bolo. The drawing is at 12 inches, but if I get a 13-inch blade, that's going to be cool too. And then just a little bit we'll need to pinch down off of the end for a tang. And you can see I got a growing stack of tiles. I think I got 8 there. Now we're going to go dust them off with a rag and deburr everything. Here I'm just taking each tile and deburring every single edge of it lightly, not really taking any material but the burr off, slightly flattening the big saw cut flats just to take down any high spots, but leaving actually a lot of the saw curve texture on it so I can actually see the direction they came off the saw, because they made up better that way if you match them all up. But during the process I'm actually feeling all of the edges with my fingertips, and if I detect any burr left I will go back and hit it in whatever spot is necessary again until there's no burr left anywhere to stand these up off the welding table or separate them from each other. Anything that might hurt the integrity of the fit up and ultimately the welded joint. Okay, so here I've got one of my tiles, and I did some work with my digital calipers to find out what the original thickness difference was between my edge bar stock and my tile stock, and try to take an equal amount off each side when grinding down to the tile. But at the end, then I put the tile on to just match grind it down to exact same thickness, because you definitely don't want the edge bar thicker than your tiles, or your tiles very much thicker than the edge bar. So now that we've got this match ground and thickness, we're going to take that in our tile, dust those off. We're going to come over here
and put that like that. This is cut to length. Yep, thickness feels good. So now we're going to actually rip this down its length to get an edge bar for each side of this. At this point, I think I'm going to put an edge bar on each side. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what I'll do. Anyway, so that's how far we are. We got 8 tiles in the mix, and the edge bar stock match ground and length cut.
Over at the Powermatic 20-inch vertical bandsaw now. Got a bimetal blade on. This is a annealed steel here, the edge bar material. And we're just going ahead and manually ripping this, pushing it through the blade. This does take a while. You gotta stand here and do it, but hell, it's just like any other kind of work. You're getting paid to do it, and you just kind of think your thoughts and do the work. I actually have a sled that I made for this kind of ripping work, but it wasn't worth to set it up for just this this one little bar. I'll show you guys that another time. In fact, I might have already. I can't recall. Anyway. Okay, so here's a drawing of our Bolo. It's a synthesis of a bunch of different things I liked about different Bolos I looked at pictures of. This is a pretty traditional Filipino shaped blade here. And then I put kind of more of an American style handle on it, but with a Filipino shape that I found. But added the single lug guard. This is going to be an integral guard. It's going to have a single file groove. It's going to go to a hidden tang. And then that's going to have a nut in here, a handle frame, and screws here. It's going to be takedown. Blade should be about 13 inches. And now I just got to transfer this to life size on paper, draw it out, and then make a pattern to check the forging against on steel. Over at the drafting table here, I'll show you what I've been up to. So this is a piece of tracing paper taped over a drawing underneath. I took this drawing as a cue, and then I scaled in Inkscape the blade up to 12 inches to where it would barely fit on a sheet of paper. And I drew on the back of that with pencil. Then I put it down onto the cardstock on the drafting table, went over it with ballpoint pen, and it presses the graphite onto the paper. Then you can actually draw over that with graphite to get a graphite transfer. And then I did the drawing over the graphite transfer, then traced it, and then I can lift off the tracing paper. So now I have a traced copy of my actual drawing. The drawing features the handle. That's the master drawing, full size. And then here is the ivory scales. I used them here at the drawing board to make sure they would fit onto the handle, just barely. And then here I've got, over at the table, the tracing paper laid down. It's also been drawn on the back of again with graphite. I've gone over it with a ballpoint pen like I did before, and this time I'm tracing it onto a secondary piece of cardstock, which I will now cut out. And then I will use that as a template to make my steel pattern with.
Here is the prepped, flipped out tile billet with the match ground edge bar. And let's hold this blade up over it so we can get an idea of if we'll be able to make the blade that we want with the billet dimensions that we have. And it's looking quite favorable. I think that there's definitely enough bulk in that billet to get a blade and tang this size forged out of it. And then we're going to take the rectangular cross-section W's bar and make the guard out of that and forge weld it on. So I'm just going to get to tacking this billet up, and we're going to make a sheet metal pattern. Just trace this onto a piece of sheet metal so we can have something to check against while we're forging this. And away we go.